Welcome to 8 and 9 Figure Mentors, the podcast that helps you get to know the people who start, grow, and exit 8, 9, and 10 figure businesses. My name's Tim Cameron Kitchen. I'm the founder of digital marketing agency Exposure Ninja, and I'm now acquiring and growing other businesses as well. And in this episode, I'm joined by Adam Callinan. Adam's the founder of BottleKeeper, which is an incredible story. I love meeting people who think completely differently to anyone else that I've met, and Adam is definitely one of those. He is, the story of BottleKeeper is wild. So this is a business that when they went on Shark Tank, they were doing about 8 million in revenue with 2 employees, right? They go on Shark Tank, they get this huge swell of sales, and they still have 2 employees. I think maybe they had a third by then. And it was wild hearing about how they handled the rush of orders that came from that. Eventually, they sold the business to private equity when they had a grand total of 6 employees. So Adam has built this business in such a non-traditional way. And it's all through looking at data and using automations and systems. Really fascinating story, incredible insight from Adam about how to grow companies and some of the experiences that led him to these realizations. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Adam from BottleKeeper and now Pentane. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tim. Excited to be here.
So you originally sort of started BottleKeeper, which was your first big success story, I guess, after, less than optimal experience at a previous company. And this seems to be a fairly common route into entrepreneurship for a lot of people. So I wonder if we could start by finding out a bit about that experience and what about that experience led you to want to do things quite differently in your own startup.
Yeah, this goes back to coming right out of college. Was at University of Arizona through 2004, actually 2005. I was on the 4.5-year plan. And I went into an orthopedic device startup. It was a functioning company, but it was super early on. They were effectively working out of an apartment. It was a family, a dad and 2 sons, and I think 1 or 2 other people at that point. But I was brought in as the first salesperson. So I was not a founder of that company. I didn't own that company. And I was obviously really young. I was like 22, 23 years old. And, we will certainly get into the things that I learned from it, most of which were from the bad and the negative and the sort of insane things that happened there over the course of a decade. But there was also a lot very positive that I learned from it. In the big scheme, like I got put in a position as the first salesperson I basically got pointed in a direction and said, grow the company. Just grow the company. You grow it down, build it up, sell product, hire people, build a downline as a 23-year-old, and basically just got told to figure it out. So I was in this amazing, and I like that. I took this job as a commission only, I had no income. It was a sort of eat what you kill role. And turned down jobs at big pharma and big medical device companies that had solid salaries and cars and all the stuff that comes with that. That's just the way that I'm wired. I like that risk thing. Obviously, that's probably why I keep doing startups. So I was good with that. And we spent years and we built the company up and, built a big team. And, over the course of, so that was in 2005 and 2008 or 2009, we spun off a technology piece that I did own a piece of. We had basically figured out how to make private health insurance companies in the US pay for health claims that they were legally obligated to, but didn't want to, which is sort of how the insurance industry works, right? Mm-hmm. And we had done that internally to deal with our own claims because we were an orthopedic device provider. And I learned really quickly, I'm sort of putting the cart before the horse here, but I learned really quickly what an efficient business looks like because we had this medical device company that I expanded from Arizona to Santa Monica in 2008 and literally restarted it in a garage from zero and built it up and, hired people as we could afford to hire people. We didn't have any investors or anything. So it was a pure grow on cash flow kind of business. And it just, this business got big and it got heavy and there was salespeople and technicians and warehouses and delivery trucks and all this stuff, between what was then multiple states that I was overseeing. And it was just really hard to get away from. And, it was a millions of dollars a year business, sub 10, but it was so much work. And then we spin off this tech piece dealing with insurance reimbursement, and it got bigger from a revenue standpoint than, this 8 or 10-year-old device company in its first 18 months from a revenue.
Wow.
And it was like 5 people in cubicles executing documents.
Wow.
So it was a huge, like, holy hell, light bulb. There's clearly a better way to do this, which gets into BottleKeeper. But the path going through that device world and the people that were involved in it, namely within the company, there was this father who was the super intimidating, lead by fear patriarch who was unbelievably, in hindsight, I mean, again, I was young and dumb at the time. I bought into it for years until I realized how insane it was extremely, like, emotionally manipulative. And I mean, he led quite literally by fear. And his 2 sons that were involved in the business running different departments were not, I would say, pulling their weight. So there was some pretty significant nepotism in there. So it just created this, like, big, massive, ugly thing that I got to sort of disassociate with, because I got to go to California and restart this thing and then run my entirely own version of it, which was great. But I learned over the course of that decade, not just what a more efficient business looks like, but I learned so much about how not to lead people, how not to treat people, how not to build a team, how not to create incentives, the importance of true transparency, financial transparency in the business, because it's really difficult to get people really behind what's happening if they have no idea what's happening. And there was so much manipulation going on for so long, much of which was financial, which gets into whole other problems. But it was a really, really good thing to leave. I mean, I ultimately sold my position in the tech company, which was, I mean, it was a win. It was not a massive win. I owned 15% of the business, so it wasn't like this big, huge thing. But I learned an incredible amount about, again, how not to build a team. So effectively, how to better build a team, how better to treat people, the importance of transparency and communication, as well as what an efficient business could look like.
I mean, that's really interesting. And you mentioned the sort of the large organization of the device company and the complexities that come with having a large team. When you started BottleKeeper, you took the complete opposite approach, right? You kept the team super lean. Am I right in thinking you got to $8 million in revenue with 2 employees? Is this right? Like, was that
it was just Matt and I. Yeah, we had no employees. Right. It was just my co-founder and I.
I mean, I kind of I wanted to ask why and also how, really. But is the why as a sort of reaction from that first experience where you saw large team equals complexity equals headaches? I'm just going to go completely the opposite direction.
100%.
Right.
Matt, my cousin, who were super close. We were close before BottleKeeper, was the best man at my wedding. Way before that. He came up with this idea for a beer product sitting on the beach in Manhattan Beach, California. I actually wasn't there. My wife and I were in Europe. And he sees people drink. He's sort of a maniac, and I could say that he knows he's a maniac, where he will only drink specifically temperatured beer out of a Corona bottle. So being on the beach, drinking a beer out of a red party cup or red solo cup or whatever, and it being 80 degrees outside, it's warm in like 3.5 minutes, is like his nightmare. So he sees people drinking out of water bottles and has literally, he's like the wacky inventor, brilliant guy, and has this idea, why can't I put a beer bottle inside of one of those? So he literally goes to Target, buys like just a simple water bottle, and we still have prototypes of it, like vice grips it to a table and hacksaws it in half and cuts up some koozie, like neoprene koozie material, and super glues it inside. And his Corona bottle fits perfectly, keeps it cold for super long. Obviously, glass in beaches is not notoriously a great idea. In some places, it's not even legal. But so it protected it, kept it cold, solved his problem. And that was the timing of that was in late 2012. And I exited that tech company and the medical world in May of 2013. So the timing was pretty unique. And he, at the beginning, I just thought it was cool. I thought it was interesting, maybe a little bit tchotchke. something that you'd see on the shelf at Spencer's Gifts for $8 and, buy it as a white elephant gift. And I've been completely honest. Like, that's the way that I thought about it. And I was honest with him. He wanted to do something together. I wanted to do something together. I just wasn't sure I wanted it to be that. And so over months of, he went and filed a provisional patent, which is a part of a process that's kind of important if you're going to go do something with that could have intellectual property. And over the course of months, I go and I think it's going to be a good idea to raise a venture fund, which is a terrible idea because I don't like raising money. So I'm really bad at it. And, he like pushes and pushes and pushes. And finally we agree that I'm going to I tell him, like, I'll be past, and I say this because he has the email he framed later on and I have hanging on a wall in my office, which is under construction, which is why I'm working out of my house right now. And he literally convinced me to take 50% of the company just to go and do it. It's like, fine, we'll do it, but here are the rules. We're not going to hire anybody. We're going to completely build this business on technology and we're going to automate the hell out of it. And I don't believe that people are going to pay real money to buy this product, at least real money being a purchase price that has enough margin in it to make it a real business. Like, if an $8 purchase price is not a real business, it's going to cost $3 or $4 to make. Like, that's not a company that scales at all. Right. I mean, it could be a fun hobby or side project, but so as part of that, we agreed to go down that path, but I wanted to test that people would swipe credit cards. Like, people that weren't our moms and dads and aunts and uncles, like, would actually swipe a credit card through a machine somewhere in the world at a real price point. So we used crowdfunding to do that, which worked way better than I was expecting it to.
Right.
And that kind of got us going.
I mean, it's an amazing story of the sort of reluctant co-founder, really. And you were thinking, I guess this is a product more than a business, and it's probably not going to work. Was the crowdfunding moment where you raised more than you were expecting? Was that the first time that you really sort of believed in the prospects of this business? Or
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, I'm a data-driven person, and I know that's an easy, kitschy thing to say, but like, I am a scientist. Like, mentally speaking, I am a scientist. My degree was in molecular and cellular biology. I have minors in like every scientific field you can think of, which is why it took me 4.5 years to graduate college. Like, I'm a scientific method-oriented person, and Matt actually has the same degree with all the same minors. So and we did at the time, like, I can step my emotional, I think that's dumb response out of that and say, let's test it. Like, let the data answer the question. And that's exactly what we did. I mean, and to be fair, there was a step before crowdfunding. I shot a video on the beach with like a GoPro camera and just of the sort of product in action, and put up a landing page and I think we spent like $500 on Google AdWords to send people to this page to submit their email if they thought, like, basically like, do you want this? And enough people did that. There was like, okay, maybe that's something there. And that's what then, okay, well, let's go to the next step. The next step was, let's make people pay for it before we go and make it. And so there wasn't very much a methodical execution to how we did that early on, to like disprove my emotional response, which is like, this thing is cool, but I don't think people are going to pay real money for it.
Okay. So you've taken an approach, which is, I guess, quite rare these days, which is, you came up with a concept, you didn't raise any funding, and you didn't want to build a small team. I feel like a lot of the time these days, the default approach is actually the opposite. First thing you do is go and raise seed round, go and build out a team, go and get some product designers, high expensive, high cost development people to build out the branding and the website and all of this. And then eventually you launch a product. What was it that appealed about that route? Is it just the fact that you were this sort of data driven, and did you not ever feel tempted to go down the seek investment route?
Never felt tempted. It was not anything that I had ever done. Like, the prior 10 years was all profitable businesses that made money. And so you grew as you could afford to grow. That's just the only thing I ever knew. But I was living in Southern California. And at that time, in the early 2010s, their startup economy was starting to boom. I mean, there was real investment, and not starting, it had started before that, but like, it was taking off. Like, you had Amplify LA down there, had just exploded and taken up a ton of investment. And so I was around that a lot. I just never understood it. I never could get my brain around go raise a bunch of money to then make a product, to then prove how you're going to make money on that product. Like, that's just not a game I've ever been interested in playing. I always wanted to be, and continue to want to be, in control of my own destiny and how I spend my time. And obviously different investors look at things differently, and who you raise money from, if you decide to do it, is really important. But I always felt like if we went and raised capital, we would for some reason, right, wrong, or indifferent, be sort of working for that person.
Okay. So I've got to ask you about the $8 million revenue, 2 employees. I think if a lot of people listen to that, they're probably thinking that must have been absolute hell to be one of those 2 people. You must have been spinning so many plates. So what did it actually look like day to day, and how did you cope?
Yeah. So again, the 2 people were Matt and I like figuring things out. Like, I like understanding how things work. I am sort of a jack of all trades, master of none. And I like that. That's the way that I operate. The ability to like learn how to do a lot of things quickly and string them together is sort of my superpower, if you will.
Right.
So going into BottleKeeper, it was like, I wanted to know how to build a website. So, I mean, in 2013, your grandma can build a website. It wasn't difficult. You just had to take the time to do it. And I wanted to know how to take product photographs, and I wanted to know how to build content. And I wanted, these are just things that if I was going to set the guardrail that we couldn't hire people, clearly we were going to have to figure it out. And so we split the company in half, created kind of this wall from the right and the left side. And Matt was responsible for everything on the back end. So our manufacturing, our shipping and fulfillment, which we did internally at the beginning. He managed the books and our finances, all that stuff. I was responsible for everything on the front end of the business. So anything a consumer would see. So like the social media stuff, the paid media stuff, the website, the branding, the email, the voice, the content, like I managed all of that. So there was a little bit of a divide and conquer. We made virtually every decision together because we have very opposing views, which is really important. I'm aggressive. He's really conservative. Meeting in the middle there is typically the best place to be. So that part of it worked really well, but it's just a big puzzle, and it's made of 1,000 pieces, and you just have to figure out where each piece in the puzzle goes. And it takes a while to get there, which is that constantly failing fast, like all these, kitschy terms that you hear and people have written a zillion books about, but they're true. Like, break stuff really, really fast and tweak it. And they're not failures. I mean, people call them failures, and that's great, but like, they have to happen. They're a critical part of the process. So you just do that stuff quickly. But to be fair, we got to $8 million and the wheels were falling off the bus rapidly. Like, that was way too big to have 0 outside employees.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what were the wheels that fell off first, and how did you know it was time to start building out a team then?
Yeah, the first big thing. So if we look at BottleKeeper, our revenue was really cyclical. And this was every single year of the company, maybe with the exception of the first, because we hadn't figured it out. We would lose money in Q1. We would crush Q2 because of Father's Day, summer's coming up, spring, like all that stuff, 4th of July, all that stuff. We would do mediocre, generally lose money in Q3, and we would do half our revenue in the last 6 weeks of Q4. Half the revenue for the entire year.
Wow.
So, I mean, that was like the hardest part of that entire business, is these swings that would happen were so mentally difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, and you want to talk about like the hard stuff. That was, to me, was the hardest parts of the business. I can remember in 2000, and I will come back to your question on what was the first thing that came off, because it was very specific. In like 2018, I mean, we did like 10 or $11 million in sales. We only had 3 team members at that point. And we were, and this is, we crushed Q4. We were just on Shark Tank, which aired right before Christmas, like December 3rd, 2018. I mean, we had the best year that we had ever had. We made a ton of money. It was awesome. And my wife and I were in Europe somewhere in early July with some friends, and I was so depressed. It's like these wild swings. I was a disaster. And it's these really weird things. It was just really difficult to go from the super highs and the intensity of doing that much revenue in that short of a period of time. We literally did like $5 million in 14 days or something, to like, and it goes silent. The business just stops December 20th. It turns off, completely turns off. It is the weirdest. I mean, I learned to deal with that, but it took some time. But customer service is the first thing that broke.
Right. Of course.
Yeah.
These are not expensive products, so you're selling a whole load of them for that sort of revenue.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, we were at a $30 per unit price point with, with some bulk discount things. We were really, really careful about using discounting. So we would really only ever, we didn't even start doing it until probably 2018 or 19. But we'd only really ever do it with bulk. Like you'd have to buy 3 or 4 in order to get discounts, or you'd have to do something to get the discount.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were able to automate so much of the customer service stuff because it's, 95% of the questions are the same 10 questions. It's like, I can't find my tracking number. I thought I ordered blue and I got green, like whatever. It's like the same 10 questions. So you can automate the hell out of that stuff. And this is like pre LLM and AI, right? I mean, that stuff is going to dramatically improve, and probably already is. I'm not playing in that world anymore. So I'm not sure, but I'm sure, I guarantee you there are probably 50 companies out there right now creating LLMs and AIs around customer service and how to better automate the interaction engagement with the consumer. But even then, like, it wasn't hard when we were getting 100 tickets a day. I could go in and automate really quickly, deal with 95 of those in 15 minutes. It was, and then you had to take for the other 5%, would take an hour. And that's fine when you're doing 100 a day, but when you're doing 2,000 a day, that 5% it's an overwhelming amount for a single person to do. So
yeah. I mean, yeah, that sounds absolutely wild. You surely must have been the only Shark Tank business that went in and had 3 employees to deal with that swell that comes after being on the show, right? I can't even imagine what that must have been like. What was a typical working day during that period?
I mean, during the fall of 2008. So you mean post Shark Tank? Like when it aired?
Yeah.
I mean, it was all hands on deck, right? Which included my wife, who's not a team member, running customer service tickets, and like Matt's now wife running. We had everybody that we could find because it wasn't complicated to learn to do. We were, we had hired some VAs and we're outsourcing as much of that as possible, and they were just executing pre-written tickets, so they were in the brand voice. It was, we had created a lot of process and structure, and that's part of the important thing of automating. There's a lot of upfront work, but once it gets going, it largely runs itself and just sort of needs some maintenance. And so over the years, we had built an incredible amount of structure and process around customer service is a great example. So putting a new person, again, even my wife as an example, into that to answer and execute support tickets, we could get somebody up to speed in an hour on how to do that effectively. So that allowed us to scale up really quickly. But again, to be clear, it was absolute mayhem. It was insane.
So, I mean, I'm still really curious about this team size thing. And you mentioned that you sort of see business as like a series of puzzles to be solved, right? And I've often been curious about the idea of constraints and how, if you're creative in business, you can find a way through. You can build something no matter what sort of constraints you start with within reason. But in practice, I think it can be quite difficult when you're building a company because you look at others around you and say, hey, my thing looks weird. Why does everyone else's look like that and mine looks like this?
A startup, you can build a startup into whatever you want to build it into. You can, and I mean that seriously, like you can read all the business books you want, and that's great. And you can get MBAs, and that's awesome. You'll learn from those things. But the reality is, in practice, you just have to get the thing moving and then let it develop however it develops. And to be fair, like there is a time at BottleKeeper where we probably should have raised some money. We probably should have sold the company or raised some money in 2019 after an insane year of Shark Tank, and we, did all this crazy stuff. But we didn't need to, and we didn't want to, and so we didn't. Like it, I just don't. I'm not I'm not a super competitive, like, tell me I can't do something, watch this guy. But in that case, I kind of was like, you tell me I can't build a, 8-figure revenue business without employees, like, watch this. Yeah. okay. I mean, we didn't get to 8 figures, but we did get really close. I just didn't care. It was working. The data was saying it was working. The data in that case was net profit at end of year was significant. We had crazy margins, and I don't give a shit what other people are doing or not doing, and it doesn't matter to me.
And from what I understand, the deal eventually fell through in due diligence, right? Which I've always thought is a weird. That seems to be like the best possible outcome because you get all the visibility of being on Shark Tank, you get the validation of actually being given an offer, but then you don't have to give away the equity on the back end, right? I don't know how you saw it at the time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of. I think if you're going to go on that show or a show like it, and obviously I can only speak to Shark Tank because that's the only one that we ever did. They're going into it without a strategy is foolish. Our strategy going into it were a couple of things. It was one of our judges was a guest judge, Alex Rodriguez, who's a famous baseball player, right? Mm-hmm. We figured, so the deal is like they overfilm the number of episodes that they can show on TV. So that kind of you get reminded of that a lot. It's like, we don't have to air your episode. And if you like screw around after the fact and disappear, we were probably not going to air your episode. And that's, so we had no intent of ever doing that, but like, that's a real thing that can happen. Like some episodes just don't get aired. And then, so you've gone through this whole thing, you've set up your inventories and you don't find out it's not going to air until a month before the season starts. So like, you don't want to be that person. And we were going into it in good faith. Like we were open to doing a deal. Even though again, we had never wanted to raise money, but this was worth considering that. So we figured that with Alex Rodriguez, because when you do your pitch, you design that pitch. Like they don't tell you what to do. You have a production manager that's assigned to you. Ours was incredible. And you work together you can do whatever the hell you want. Within limits, like we wanted to get the Sharks out of their chairs up into like a beach scene, and they couldn't do that because the camera angles don't work with lights. And so like there are some limitations, but you can literally do whatever you want. So for us, once we found out that Alex Rodriguez was going to be on the show, we figured that if we could get him throwing a ball on TV, there is a 0% chance that they're not going to air our episode. Even if it sucks, even if it's like the worst episode ever, they're going to have Alex Rodriguez throwing a ball in a Shark Tank pitch that is going to be on TV. And it's probably going to be in like their promo reels.
Yeah, right. And they'll use that in the ads and everything. Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So we completely redesigned our intro like 2 weeks before taping we built like this kitschy carnival thing with like a wooden box and 5 bottle keepers with beer bottles inside of them, and had him throw a ball from across the stage like you would at a carnival to break the bottle, to show that the glass bottle wouldn't break when he drills us and knocks it on the floor. So that was our opener. Was like, hey, we have 5-time MLB All-Star and blah, 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 come up here and throw a ball. So that worked perfectly because they did absolutely use it like in all their promo reels, and it worked exactly perfectly. Amazing. But then in the show, we went into the episode asking for $1 million for 5%, which is a pretty crazy valuation in a Shark Tank world. It was, at least then. I haven't watched it in a while, so maybe it's crazier now. And they, of course, you get into like the metrics about the company and they're like, why the hell are you here? I mean, Mark Cuban's literal quote is, you're either the worst business people in the world or you don't need to be here. Like that was like his quote on CNBC. Yeah. Which is fair. Like we knew that was going to happen. So we were about to launch into retail. We had huge retail demand because we had said no to it since the beginning because it violated our hire a person guardrail. I knew if we went into retail, it was going to require somebody to manage that. And so we said no to it for years. But it worked really well because by the time we went into retail, we had such significant demand and a massive wait list that in the first year, we went from 0 to 5,000 US stores, and we got to dictate pricing. We got to dictate where it got placed. We got to dictate that they couldn't sell it online. And these are like big retailers like Nordstrom and Ace Hardware. And, it was cool. It was a really cool way to do that. But we use that in Shark Tank as like, we don't know how to do this, which is true. We had no idea how to do that because we hadn't done it yet. So we'll use your expertise to do it. And we can use your capital to buy more inventory and blah, blah, blah. And we ended up getting that exact deal for both Mark and Lori for $1 million for 5%.
Right.
So they edited it amazingly. They made us look way better than we deserved to look. in, after the fact, cutting an hour worth of filming down to 7 minutes or whatever they do.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. And it's quite a pitch as well. I think, I don't know if you've ever seen the UK version, Dragon's Den, but it's
Yeah, I
really
have.
terrible compared to Shark Tank. The pitches in Shark Tank are so much better. The businesses are so much better. In the UK, you'd be like, oh, someone's, some crackpot inventor from their shed has invented a new type of screw or something like this, and they've done like 30K of revenue in the last 6 years, and they want 15 grand for 0.5% of the business. Like it's just horrible in comparison. So congrats on going big on such a large stage and doing so well. It's amazing. Obviously the
But we
business
didn't do the deal in real life.
You didn't do the deal in real life
to close that loop. We tried
Yeah.
a very different versions of the deal. Like, you get on TV, they don't know you, you don't know them. There's zero diligence, and then they agree to give you $1 million. Like, things are going to change on both sides. Like, you get to diligence them just like they get to diligence you. So we didn't end up doing either deals with either Mark or Lori, but individually for different reasons, and it was very amenable. They're both great to deal with. Just didn't make sense.
So you kept the business and you kept it running and kept it going, and then eventually decided to sell it in 2021. How did you know it was the right time to exit?
We were tired of doing it. To be, honest, like, we had over the years, we had, once a month, someone, granted, probably 98% of them were spam, but once a month, someone reach out and say, hey, we want to have a conversation about acquiring the company or blah, blah, blah. And we didn't care. Again, it was making great money. It gave us tons of flexibility. We were enjoying doing it. And then it just, as paid media got harder and harder and harder, something you're surely very familiar with.
Absolutely.
We couldn't figure out, this is a big mistake in the business. And one of the reasons that I'm building Pentane very differently, we couldn't figure out how to get off of paid media. We couldn't, we tried every other platform. We couldn't figure out how to, and not even just paid media, namely Facebook and Instagram drove almost all of our revenue. And it just got more and more expensive. And just, it's like the bigger we got, we amassed a pretty large patent portfolio. It was like I was spending most of my time dealing with patent infringement stuff with lawyers and doing stuff I didn't like doing. Like, I like the early stages of companies. And we were kind of getting to that middle, not late stage by any stretch, but like middle stage where it's more management and less creative and building.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, and Matt was on the same page. Like, we weren't enjoying it nearly as much as we wanted to. And so we started listening to those, we had one of those reach out from a reputable business, a reputable company that said, hey, we want to have a conversation. And so we started having those conversations. And then we got a term sheet from one company, and another company, a much bigger private equity company that had just bought Arctic Outdoors in the fall of 2020, which is a big outdoor brand here.
Yep.
Came, and we were able to kind of leverage them against each other, which was amazing. So it moved really, really fast and was a much better deal. But again, we had our own guardrails, which is like, we're out. I'm not going to drag along and own 3% of this for forever. Like, we want 100% to be bought out, and I want to be out of the company by the end of the year. Like, we had built it. That was an easy thing to do. Like, the company was not dependent on me or dependent on Matt. Like, we had a lot of systems and structure. And at that point we had 4 outside team members that were really, really good. They were amazing, amazing people. Well, yeah, yes, at the point that we got
4 outside team members. You tripled your headcount.
I know. We had 4 people.
That was going to be one of my questions, is obviously when an acquirer comes in, they're going to look at what's the key man risk. And if, 2 of the founders want to step out, they'll probably be looking, all right, is there a decent second tier management team in place that can take on the day-to-day running, especially if the founders let one out completely. So how did you sort of overcome that, given that there were only 4 people left? And how did you? I'm guessing you position the systems as a strength rather than 2 of us are leaving, so that's a weakness type thing.
Yeah, in the company that ultimately acquired BottleKeeper, again, was private equity, so they had their own. They had already replaced the executive team at Arctic with a really, really, really strong operator. His name is Bill Pond, who's the CEO. There's an amazing, amazing guy, and really, really, really strong operator. They didn't need me
Right.
which was good. Again, like that's a really, really good thing. Let's back up. We intentionally looked at the value that we were creating in BottleKeeper, knowing that we didn't want to own it forever. We didn't want it to be, even from the beginning, like there are other buckets in my life that BottleKeeper didn't fill. And the same with Matt. Like we didn't want to do it forever. So we knew that we had to build different types of value inside the business that didn't revolve around us as the operators. And that's important. Like you want your business to be anti-fragile, right? You can't have the founder of the business gets hit by a beer truck and is gone for 2 months and everything falls apart. Like that's super important. You need to be able to do that. You need to be able, as the owner, you need to be able to go on vacation for a month and for things to continue to operate. Like think of that exact thing. Build your systems like that, because that could happen. You could get hit by a beer truck tomorrow and be gone for 2 months and things can't unravel. So we focused on the intellectual property side of the business, and we focused on the value of the brand. On the intellectual property side, by the time we got acquired, we had 42 patents, and they were epic. Like we've literally owned the space for metal drinkware, and Arctic was a metal drinkware company. So that is a no-brainer for them. I mean, they got to expand their product lines with very defensible, already defended, proven out, pretty big patent portfolio. So that was like value point number one. That had nothing to do with me or Matt being continuously involved. And the other was the brand. Like Arctic was a lower margin brand. They're changing that with Bill there, and they're doing a really good job of that. But BottleKeeper was a higher margin brand. Like we were a more premium product. At the point that we got acquired, I mean, our products were selling individually between $30 and $40 per unit.
Right.
And we had insane, I mean, our gross margins were like 85%. So we had really, really strong, for a consumer product company, we had really, really strong margins, which opened up a distribution type that they couldn't really do at Arctic, which was wholesale, retail, et cetera. So they didn't, honestly, this is kind of funny. Like in the first 4 conversations we had with the team at Windpoint, which included Bill at Arctic, I don't remember, and I remember making a point of this. I'm pretty confident it didn't happen. We spent hours in meetings and board meetings and all these meetings going through a potential acquisition. Not one time did they ask us what our revenue was. Not one time did they ask us if we were profitable.
Wow.
Like that's not what they were buying. They weren't buying our revenue. They were buying our products and our brand.
Yeah. Right. So the sort of the whole setup really didn't matter. This is I won't say like an acqui-hire, but for products.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. Yeah, I mean, Arctic already had their entire custom built ecosystem. Like they were on their own custom site, their own custom ERP, their own custom fulfillment. They had their own warehouse with 300 people. I mean, it was a huge hundreds of millions of dollars a year business compared to us. And so we just got put onto all those things. And that was largely my role. We closed in March of 21. I was there through the end of the year. My role was to oversee the integration of our stuff into their stuff, knowing that I wasn't going to be there beyond the end of the year, and the likelihood of much of our team being there, going from like small, fast-paced startup into a pretty big company is a significant shift.
Oh, it's amazing. What a journey. And then, so after BottleKeeper, you now do Pentane, which is advising e-commerce businesses and consulting with them to help them grow, right?
Yeah, it's a SaaS platform that tries to encapsulate me helping a business operate profitably into a SaaS platform so that it can be done thousands of times and not 3 times, because it's time consuming, right? Yeah. I mean, we basically just took what we knew from BottleKeeper. One of the, we got lucky with Facebook in the timing. These are all things that you get to look back in hindsight and say, well, that was lucky. Most of them are timing related, right? We knew, because we had been in other businesses, and Matt also had an MBA in addition to his nerdy science degree. We knew and figured out early on how to pull levers inside of BottleKeeper to make it drive more profitable revenue. And we did that because we built these crazy spreadsheets and systems just to solve our own problems, because we couldn't find a tool or technology that would tell us if we were profitable yesterday. We would know if we were profitable last month when we get our P&L in 3 weeks. But like, I wanted to know, as the person pulling the paid media, do I hit the gas pedal or do I need to hit the brakes? Or do we maybe need to coast for a little bit? And so we just wrote math and built all these systems on spreadsheets that we ran the entire length of the business on for a decade. And it became this big, heavy, like massive, ugly behemoth of a spreadsheet. And to me, it was, again, we were just solving problems. So fast forward, we sell, I'm out, I take some time and start consulting a couple of companies that I had invested in years before and look under the hood. And one's a $20 million business, one's a $1 million a year business, and realize that neither of them, doing completely different amounts of revenue at different, both are profitable, one very profitable. They had no idea how they actually made money. Like they didn't understand the levers to pull inside the business to change or improve the outcome. Doesn't mean they were doing bad. They just, at the end of the year, they know they have revenue and they have expenses, and revenue minus expenses equals net profit. And although that's true, if you can understand the complexities of what drives those individual numbers, you can really, really change that outcome. So I started building systems inside these companies, and it totally changed the way that they operated. One of them was already doing $1 million a year in net profit. We increased it by 50% the next year.
Wow.
Just by understanding how contribution margin works. Wow. And how, just these things that are really important inside of a business. So then I got paid as an advisor to help turn around a consumer product company that was a $2 million a year business, losing $100,000 a month with a couple of months left of life. And it was the exact same thing. Like it was a great product and a really good team. They were kind of heavy on payroll and things, but the reality is they didn't understand how the business made money. So exact same thing, built a system, the same system inside their company, and it completely changed them. It told them they needed to 3x their ad spend, and that their return on ad spend could come down from 6 to 2.5. And they would go from losing $100,000 a month to making $40,000 a month. And that's what happened in 3 months. Completely changed the business. So that was like this probably should be something other than spreadsheets. Maybe we'll make this into a software platform.
Yeah.
That's where Pentane comes from.
So I can see how you got a proof of concepts quite early for that, and there was a bit of a pull from the market for that service. And I can also see how it sort of plays into your data and scientific approach, because you're essentially taking that and overlaying it on these different businesses to identify where the opportunities are.
100%.
Are there any? Do you find that there are common metrics or misunderstandings that you see as standard across the businesses that are using Pentane?
Yes. And I believe this to be across virtually all small consumer businesses, let's say sub 20 million a year consumer businesses. Before I say this, I'll say the math is the same, whether it's a landscaping company or it's a $1 billion oil company or it's BottleKeeper. The math is the same. And it's not opinion. It's not my perspective. It's literally just what the math says. The two things that we continuously see happen, and I saw happen in the early companies that I consulted with, is one, companies have a tendency, because they don't have proper information, to arbitrarily assign ad budgets. They just say, I'm comfortable spending $10,000 a month, so we're going to spend $10,000 a month. And I understand that because it's an expense. It is an expense. And I'm not pretending it's not an expense, but it's also the fuel for the engine that drives the business. And so if we're underspending on ad dollars and not knowing it, and we're going to our paid media agency or our internal marketers and saying, here's $10,000, do good. Like, please do good. Like, do good, whatever the hell that means. And do good to me means you need to make that $10,000 earn $100,000, which is completely unrealistic in pretty much any scenario, certainly most of them, right? And so the whole situation is set up for failure. The marketing agency is never going to do good enough for the business, and the business isn't providing enough fuel for that engine for the business to have the possibility of doing good. The result of which is the business is losing money and nobody can figure out why. So that's one. So one of the things Pentane does is takes in your expense structure from a P&L, and it tells you exactly how much you need to be spending in order to drive the amount of revenue to get to break even or generate a 5% or 10% or whatever it is for you, whatever your goals are, net margin. And then as your revenue increases, it shows you exactly how your return on ad spend decreases. They're inversely related. So for example, if a company needs $3,000 a day at a 20 return on ad spend to break even. At $5,000 a day, that return on ad spend might be 4. It might be 2.5. Like, we get into realistic range relatively quickly. And there's a lot of math why that we could certainly get into. It gets kind of into the weeds, but knowing that allows you to make better decisions around how you spend ad dollars and where the media agencies and whatnot need to live with ROAS guardrails, return guardrails.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're using. And don't forget to leave us a rating and review. This is a brand new show, so we need all the ratings and reviews that we can get. And if there's anyone in your network that you think might enjoy this, then please do send them along.